Started Blue is an accumulation of like the work that I've been making over the last 2 years about Black people's relationship with water. The show is specifically about those who were enslaved, brought on ships, and didn't make it to the next land. I started my career, I was like around like 15, at being young and Black, seeing how the people around me that I love have barriers of access.
How did you actually like position people? For example,
I don't position people.
Okay, what if these bodies were actually at the bottom of the ocean, frozen in time, like this couple like holding each other in their final moment?
I don't know how to say this because it like transcends maybe some of the language that I can use, but
what's going on, everybody? My name is Kendrick Beausoleil. I'm a lawyer by trade. I'm also the co-founder of Five-A-Side Media, which is a multimedia company which highlights the intersection of Black culture and soccer. I'm also a DJ. I'm a brother. I'm a son. I'm an art lover. For some context, the context in which folks are probably seeing this in, and also the context that brought us together, I started a page called KBLIKESART a couple months ago with the intent of just sharing like galleries that I've been to, art pieces that I've been to, artists that I appreciate, because I felt like I was in a rhythm of going to experience like all this art, all these beautiful pieces like by myself, which isn't a bad thing, but I was kind of scrolling through my phone and I was like, damn, like I haven't really had the opportunity to share this with anybody and I don't know who to share it with. So my intent was to just like put out things that I've seen, artwork that I've seen, artwork that I've appreciated. And so now we're here. I started just making TikToks and Instagram reels. Somebody actually saw my reels and then invited me to your gallery opening. And so I think I also want to make this a space where artists can come and like share their creative process, share things that they're working on, share things that they put out already. And so I appreciate you for taking the time to be here with me today. So if you want to take a quick second to just introduce yourself, that would be lovely.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
My name is Diana Sinclair. I am an artist, a creative right now. Like you said, I have a show open in Soho at Plato Gallery, my first solo show at a gallery.
Fire.
I think just generally like a curious person. I think I've also found myself in the realm of a researcher too lately. And like a life curator. I'm trying to embrace that more.
What does that mean? What is a life curator?
Ooh, this one's like a deep one.
It's fine. We could get deep.
I think like there's a general issue of consciousness in our day-to-day life that we're facing. I think with the current, like what has been like a new development in our recent generation of all the information that's coming at us due to the technology that we have every day. I've been trying to think more about how you apply yourself consciously to curating like what you consume, what you're around, what you take in. And as an artist, that's really important because innately like what's around us and what we are consuming is going to make its way into our work. So there's been a lot of shaving down that's been necessary, or just kind of like consciously being opinionated about the world around me and making decisions on what I let in or keep out. So I think in that case, like if like life curator is like a way of putting it, but it's more about trying to be very present in every moment and not just blindly like accept and take everything around me in.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently too. I was really telling my friend on Friday, I spent like probably like 90% of that day like on my phone.
Yeah, it's
like
scary when that happens.
It's shameful. It's a shameful thing to say.
I don't think so.
But
it's designed that way purposefully. It's addictive. So I please don't like sit with shame over it. But no, it's scary. I think that it should be scary in the way that like, you know, other addictive things are that we have like more consciousness and like give people help for.
Yeah, we don't really talk about it like an addiction the way we talk about like crack addiction. Like you'll see somebody on the street on a corner kind of like drugged out and be like, but like in a different context, you'll see somebody like staring at their phone for like an extended period of time, like no social activity, but nobody looks at that like it's like, oh, that's regular.
It's not just that. I mean, like it was probably a video that I was watching where someone was talking about like how like on a TikTok, how quickly we go through like such like deep and a wide spectrum of emotions all at once. It's like, oh, this was funny. Oh, this was sad. Oh, this is going on in Palestine. Oh, this is going on around the corner from my house. Oh, this is a really interesting art video, and I'm going to stay longer for this one. But now I'm watching something funny. And it's like, think about like, I don't really think that we were designed for that much up and down. And as an artist, like it requires a lot, I think, of concentrated focus on like specific pieces, but then also hopefully like your career at large and like what am I building, and having like time to step back and away and like look at the bigger picture. But if you're so like in the phone or in things that are going on externally, it's really hard to dive into those self-assessments.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
So how have you been as of late, like trying to limit it? Because I feel like for me, the phone is one thing, and like I could throw my phone into the corner, but then it's also like just also like being in a state of constant like consumption. So like even if I'm not on my phone is like in my bed in a different room. I'm like watching a music video, or like I'm watching something on Netflix, or like even if I'm doing work, I have music on in the background. And like I've even noticed that music sometimes starts to like hit less. Because like I'm constantly listening to music. So like how have you been able to kind of like decrease, I guess, your intake in that sense?
I think like meditation is really important. Like the habit of meditation is like, yes, something that you sit down and you do for maybe 15, 30 minutes to an hour, whatever it may be. But the purpose of it is to increase your consciousness in day-to-day life.
Right.
So it's sitting with it almost like practicing. And then you're supposed to go for the rest of the day applying that or building up that muscle in you. So I try to meditate. I haven't necessarily had as much time lately. I should carve out the time for it. But I think that like for me, it's been like time on transportation, maybe trying to like turn my headphones off and just breathe. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a silent place, but just sitting and allowing your mind to be blank and to like watch what thoughts arise. I do that sometimes. Actually, like sitting down and like going through like the things that I've saved on Instagram, the things that I've saved on Pinterest, and kind of like trying to carve through where my headspace is at, like what I do want around me, and like kind of putting more of a label or name to that, and putting that into like a separate board, and kind of building mood boards and being like, oh, this is what I'm communicating to myself, but I'm doing it so passively, has also allowed me to like, I found it, this is like a really simple and somewhat like silly example, but I found it easier with shopping because every time I've like saved a brand or a page on Instagram or whatever, like I consciously will sit down later and put it onto a board, and I'll be able to see like, does this fit? What is the general theme? And I'll be like, this is actually what I like. I'm into sustainable, maybe flowy, more neutrals. Like I like gold rings. So when I've gone out and today I was at a vintage like fair, I found it a lot easier to navigate and not be like thrown in all different directions of, do I like this? Because I will kind of imagine it in relationship to my mood board at home and be like, would this fit on there? Probably not. Like, so my taste, I've been kind of trying to narrow down on that. And of course it's always shifting, but that requires the self check-ins. So I think like that's one example, but I think that there's a lot of things that we do passively that like putting aside time to really narrow in on, like even building a playlist. I mean, like, oh, this is like this vibe. You know what I mean? And there's like so many minute examples of this. Reading a book and then writing something about it afterwards, whether you share it or not, but like forcing yourself to really digest it and sit with the thoughts and what you took away from it. so those are all habits, like building up habits that kind of counteract the smoothness of our brains and where it's being pushed into.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's important for people to hear, because I think, like you said, the world that we're kind of consuming right now is like intended for us to be like distracted.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
all over the place. And I think I definitely resonate with like putting things on a board. Like one of the most life-changing things that I've done recently was just get a whiteboard. And like instead of putting things in like Google Calendar or like in this like cloud space in my notes or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
and it gets lost.
Exactly. Like actually physically putting it on a board just feels different. Or like putting little notes about like what I want to do today or how like things I want to do every day. Like once you put it somewhere physically, it feels like almost like more part of you in a way. Even though it's not physically on you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's really dope. And I'm curious because it sounds like you're very grounded in like just being an intentional person, like kind of going inwards and being reflective. I'm curious if that comes from your upbringing at all. Like, can you talk a little bit about like where you're from, like your culture, I guess, like your familial culture and stuff like that? Because I feel like that probably all informs the way you think and then also your work subsequently.
Oh, absolutely. I was really blessed, I think, to have a very thoughtful family. So I grew up homeschooled in New Jersey.
Okay.
I was homeschooled through high school, but in high school I started working in the arts multiple days a week. So I kind of like I started, I guess, my career when I was like around like 15 at like interning, and I like had a brief like temporary job at the new museum, like things like that, which were just building my experience and kind of trying to again figure out like what is it that I want to do.
Right.
But I've said it a million times to so many people on so many different platforms, but my family, my parents specifically, like I'm very blessed with them. They are an interesting balance where like my mother is very like fiery and energetic, and she's a storyteller, she's a writer. My dad, he's an engineer, but his mind is a lot more like technical. He's quieter. So like growing up with them too, and those skills and just way of looking at the world and how they imparted that on me, or even just the habits that I think that like we had in the house really helped build, yes, my like the like setting out with intention, but also, you know, I am very young in this, 21, and they were able to help instill a certain level of self-security that wasn't based off of outside validation, which I was really lucky for as well. Like I am very like driven and goal-based, but I still have this idea of like what's for me is for me and what's not is not. And like to this day, of course, like we're very close, and I feel like they're very involved with all the like steps and decisions that I've made through my career, which has been like I'm very lucky because as I've gotten older and had exposure to more family dynamics, I've been able to recognize my privilege. It's not that we had the most growing up, but in that we were rich.
Right. Yeah, that's fire.
Yeah.
What's your like family background?
My mother, she is from Barbados in Germany.
Okay.
And my father's from Panama.
Fire.
Yeah.
So like heavy Caribbean influence.
Yeah. Interestingly, like I feel like maybe more in the like maybe like the last like 5 years has there been more of a focus of like trying to really directly connect with it. But I did grow up with listening to soca music, and with my family that has immigrated from Barbados to, most of them were in Brooklyn, but my family decided to move out to Jersey. And having those influences and hearing the stories growing up, and my mother's side of the family is like has mostly been women, so having that also, like the Caribbean woman influence was really deep. And I feel like I've only learned maybe more in like the past like year how much that has influenced even the way that I speak or communicate.
Right.
Sometimes with like the directness of like people from the Caribbean, humor too. But there was an element, I think, probably from being homeschooled, and then going into working so much that my understanding of what I did have and didn't have, like, was I didn't have one in relationship to the world, but I've been able to grow with that more recently, which has helped me kind of place myself and also like my art more in like the context of the things around me.
Right. You alluded to it a couple of times in terms of like kind of going straight into working.
Yeah.
While still so young. I think I've seen a little bit on the interwebs about you in like the NFT space.
Yeah.
Or like in the like kind of the NFT crypto-ish space. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean that like came out of like slight necessity, right? Because right when I was getting to the point of being like, all right, like let's either like make a decision about college or like really make some like career choices. The photographer who's still one of my like best friends that I was interning for when I was younger, like I remember at the point of 2020, we were gonna like start like I was gonna kind of like graduate maybe a little bit more to like an apprenticeship.
Right.
And then all of that came crashing down in 2020.
Yeah.
So that was like, it's funny because people kind of talk about like the different places that people were at and how there was like the graduating class. And it's like, that was around where I was. So all of a sudden, as I'm starting to build my practice as a young person, so many physical places and connections and things were just like closed off to me.
Yeah.
So that turned into in 2020, like I hadn't been photographing, but that's when I started photographing.
During like quarantine
times.
Okay.
Yeah. I was interning for a photographer beforehand, but I hadn't been photographing. I was going to be an apprentice to him.
Right.
And I ended up, getting like a really old camera from someone close to me at the time. And I was just kind of like started and like learning that way, like slowly doing some shoots. And I applied to Young Arts and was able to build a portfolio in that amount of time to win that award.
Amazing.
And usually
after you just picked up.
Yeah, it was very shortly after. But I felt like, so prior to that, I was drawing and painting because my dad's an artist and that way he's very technical with it. So he imparted a lot of technical skills on me. And I think I was able to carry over that, like the idea of composition and values and, putting together a piece into photography. It wasn't too difficult of a transition.
Right.
So yeah, I then applied. I was able to win that award. Typically, everyone's flown down to Miami. I'm doing that virtually. So I'm trying to like build my creative life while still being so isolated, losing my access to the city. And that's where then like working in Web3 kind of came about, where for me, it was more of an interest in, like initially it was more of like an observer's curiosity. I initially like began with educating like primarily like single Black mothers who were photographers and like running some education sessions, being like, I think that this will affect your career, like it's something that's like that's growing in steam, growing in potentially like an industry standard in some ways. Like we don't know exactly how this how this could affect you or your livelihoods. So you should at least know what's going on, know the lingo, so that when you read about it or people talk with you about it, you're aware. So I was doing that for a little bit, and then slowly, like, I was just like, I have some photographs from last year's Young Arts portfolio, so I was able to sell a few of those. And then, like, things kind of were able to carry forward from there. I met a lot of really amazing artists from around the world, and I think that that was part of where I was able to find my joy at that period. Because I was still able to grow, like, my creative connections despite what was going on in the world. And there was that time to, like, sit at home and talk with people for hours and kind of get different insights and learn more about their practices. I think that, like, for that, and also, like, teaching me about markets and how work can go up and down and dealing with collector relationships and things, like, I was able to learn so many skills, but still in a structured, somewhat safer environment than I think kind of being out in maybe the art world that we're used to right now. I can see how, had I not had those experiences, how I could be coming in a lot more naive and exposed.
Right. So at the time, were you making NFTs, or like what was that process like?
Yeah,
Because I was like kind of into it at the time.
Really?
Like, yeah, I feel like I heard about the like what was the ape, the
Bored apes.
the bored apes, and then there was like an ape yacht club. Like it was like a whole thing, and like I saw people making like millions of dollars off of like a picture of like a monkey.
Yeah.
And so I kind of, I mean, I was more.
I know the girl who drew those.
That's insane.
Yeah.
I was definitely more successful in the like crypto side of things.
Yeah.
So like those kind of like meme coins at the time that like were worth 0.0005 cents, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, it's like approaching $1. Like that side I was successful on. I was miserable.
I dabbled. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was an interesting time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I was miserably unsuccessful in the NFT space. Yeah, because I was like, I feel like at the time it was so new that like if you didn't have the like experience and knowledge in that space prior, it was very easy to like just start buying things and being like, I think this will be worth more in like a couple months, or like, and having to have that patience too of like this might not change in value for years, or like, and we don't even know if this industry is gonna last. Like there was just so many question marks.
There was so many question marks.
Yeah, so I'm curious to like know your process too, and like actually creating.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always approached it still from like a traditional artist lens. Like I didn't put out that many works. Like there's people who did build like collectible projects. So maybe that's I try to think sometimes how to like relate it, but like maybe it's like someone having like designed like Pokemon cards.
Yep.
You know, I still approached it like, this is my art. Like I'm gonna put it. There's gonna be an auction. It's a one of one. Like I approached it maybe the same way that I approached like my traditional art career. So that also allowed me to like not have much on the market, but still do well for myself and build more direct collector relationships. People that like still like support me today in a different way.
Yep.
So in that case, like I participated in that way, but I also like curated and tried to like help. I think like the thing about it that frustrated me, that I said openly at times, was, of course, being young and Black, seeing how the people around me that I love have barriers of access. I saw this space and I felt like at times there wasn't solutions being posed or opportunities for people with less access to get involved in those markets. So therefore, like, we kind of saw like a very like monolithic artist viewpoint at times. Like, this is not speaking for everybody, but thinking about how many diverse artists there are in the world, and kind of like what we were seeing in that space, But then thinking about, like, what about the kid that doesn't have Wi-Fi at home?
Yeah.
What about the kid that doesn't have a laptop? What about the kid that doesn't have, like, the education or the money enough to get started because it costs to mint something? So in that, like, I try to direct opportunities towards Black artists, like, across the diaspora, and, like, put together, like, collector relationships or help them get onto platforms that were, like, invitation gated. And, you know, it was the period that it was. I think I learned a lot. I'm trying to, like, there was a period afterwards where I felt so burnt out and frustrated, mainly because I was at a point where I wanted my work to grow and evolve. I didn't feel like it could necessarily in that space. But also the world was shifting. We were opening up. We were able to be outside. Like, I had frustrations with where I was at. But that only changed when I turned inwards and thought about, like, what was it that I needed to grow as an artist. And that was time to myself. So time to myself to figure out what I wanted to do, who I wanted to consume my art, where I wanted like my work to be viewed, and how I wanted it to impact people, which I came to find out wasn't in that space anymore. And I was able to gratefully step away on my own terms without having a market crash on me or anything. Like, I just took time. In that time, things did start, like, not going so well,
sadly,
you know. And that is what it is. But it was more about, like, the personal thing of, like, what is it that I need, coming back to, like, self-assessment. And I went into a period that was really dark after, because I felt very isolated. There was questions of, like, did I make the right decision, because I had now cut off my income stream. But that evolved into a lot of introspection, and then, you know, slowly but surely, like, this next body of work, which I only had the space to really sit with because I'd carved that away, which I guess you weren't at my artist talk, but I had said that a few like a week or so ago at Plato, where I think that at times when you are a creator of anything, we can battle with the need for, like, assurance or validation, but that some of the best things come out of, like, sitting in that space with yourself and being able to be self-validating of what you're working on and presenting something then later that people are able to consume. And of course they're going to say whatever, like, likely very positive things about it. But it's hard to build that thing that's, you know, that's unaffected by others, but able to then be appreciated by them later if we don't kind of sometimes step away from people.
Okay, there's a lot there.
I know.
I think,
sorry, I went on a tangent.
No, I appreciate it. And I think that's very necessary and important background to understand, like, the body of work that you put together. Threaded Blue, is that the most recent body of work that you've created since kind of that NFT, like, crypto, or was there something in between?
It's one that I would claim as, like, a finished body of work. I dabbled in, like, a lot of pieces because, you know, post that period, that body of work came from like, the answer to my depression, which was because I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or making art about now. I've now laid myself bare. I've cut myself off from my income. I'm now, like, you know, in my savings trying to be like, what am I supposed to do? God, like, you led me here. You know, in the valley. But that led to, you know, conversations with my younger brother about, like, his experience in the sport of swimming, which, you know, I had my years with when I was younger as well. Things that he told me led me to start researching about, like, our shared experiences with microaggressions and just, like, some of the the quiet violence of that space when you are a Black person in that sport, and just why that is. Why is this idea that Black people don't swim? It wasn't something that we had considered because we were just doing the thing.
Yeah.
But now me being outside of it and hearing what he was going through, which I had purposely like shortly prior to 2020, I'd had a really bad shoulder injury. And threw myself into my work, which is part of like throwing myself into my photography.
Yep.
And like it all kind of ended up slowly connecting. And retrospect is always like 2020, seeing how things led into the next. But you know, it was conversations with him that led me to then do research. And that research, I think, like, it's beautiful too to have that experimentation phase. So I was photographing in Costa Rica and Senegal and California, like Black surfers, Black surf communities, because that was some of like what I had found in my research, that surfing was first recorded in Ghana. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we can claim it.
Yeah.
There's a lot that we can claim that we don't think is ours.
Yeah, exactly.
But, you know?
Yeah.
So I developed like lots of fascinations, and I was having my own personal revelations, and I kind of went into this period of creating a lot of different work that was unified in, you know, the subject matter, but I was still developing the muscle of kind of, again, like shaving down, putting into like one body of work, which I knew was going to come, but you have to like bounce around a little bit and allow yourself that time to like not be making something for like, again, like the consumer, and just be like, I'm just trying this out. So I made like a few different like pieces and like mini bodies of work that like now I don't know if I would share with people or put out, because to me they were like sketches,
right?
You know, sketches of what this body of work then came to be. But this is still only one pocket of this research, which is like so deep and so wide. I think it's, I mean, I don't like ever making permanent statements, but it feels like a life project, you know, something that like there's so many intricacies to, beyond just physical spaces and being like, let's talk about like the segregation of beaches and pools or whatever.
Yeah,
like,
there's a lot of different ways you can take it.
Yeah, you could talk about like the womb space of Black women, and that being like, you know, space of water and life and death and pain and trauma, and you know, like it's like there's so many ways to interpret like the connection of Black people, Black bodies, the diaspora, and water. Water as a life source, water as a destroyer, you know. So yeah, I hope that answers. I'm like, I know I went on my little tangent.
No, it's helpful. I'm very interested to hear more about just like your thoughts, I guess, from your research, but then also your like experience in like different physical locations on the relationship between like Black people and water. And then also if you can kind of just like intro like what Threaded Blue is.
Threaded Blue is an accumulation of like the work that I've been making over the last 2 years about like very specified areas of research about the Black people's relationship with water. The work in the show is specifically about those who were enslaved, brought on ships to be brought here or to wherever the next destination of the New World was, and didn't make it to the next land, who ended up passing away in the water. There were people who were thrown, people who jumped, people who were sick and their bodies were dumped. And there's like a very deep and sad history with that, but I was really inspired when I had a conversation with Kathy Foley-Meyer, who she was curating a show and with the support of UC Irvine about they had a huge research grant for research into the Black Pacific. And she was putting together this show called Descent and Transformation, and she was one of the few people that I had met whose work preceded mine in terms of like she had already gone down all of the rabbit holes. So it was really cool to sit down with her as someone whose brain contained the information that I was starting to process.
Yeah.
And she taught me a lot just in having a conversation with her prior to like her inviting me into the show. And one of the things that she introduced me to was the concept of residence time. In this case, the amount of time that it takes for the ocean to fully consume something. For bodies that can take up to 260 million years.
Wow.
This is on an abstract level, of course, but we start having a conversation about all the DNA and the matter that is still in the ocean from that event. This kind of alternate timeline of some of our ancestors that still exists in the ocean as their final resting place. And I was like fascinated with both like the scientific side, the spiritual side, the storytelling. When you do think about the depth of the emotions and how that sits in one's body when going through a traumatic event like that, making a decision, do I stay breathing and go to God knows where under this type of hell, or do I make a choice of faith and jump and be welcomed by the spiritual energy of the ocean. So in sitting with that, I had been reminded of one of those like experiments that I had thought I had done and failed from during that period of depression, where I had taken Polaroids of myself and tried to like work with emulsions and exposing it to water. I put some in microwaves, and it was something that I put away and never thought about, but I felt like I had failed. I didn't accomplish what I wanted to at that point because I also had no direction. But I remembered those experiments and just the relationship of the physical material of the Polaroid and water and how it responded to it. And like my original experiment, like it got torn up and I was like, but thinking of that visual, I was able to, I guess, abstractly connect it to the body as a material that then also began to like fade, erode, and transition into something else. Transition also like into the ocean.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. So that then, that inkling of an idea carried into developing out the process into something that had more structure to it. Because I think that was something that maybe I had to build at that point, where it's like, okay, I have an idea, I have the basis of the research, the subject matter. Now I have to figure out how to turn this into an object that can consist of a series that can say different things but be very connected. And that led to, inviting mostly friends or friends of friends to model for me nude. I photographed them on Polaroid. They were like sprayed with water, so their skin was wet. That led to hundreds of Polaroids that then I had to curate down to and think about how would they look at the size that they are in the gallery, which is 46 by 46 inches. After deciding those, I carry them into the next stage of, cutting them open. They're in trays of water. There is a point of surrender that I had to reach, because initially I think our automatic response is to approach things with control. But the whole point of the body of work was about this lack of control, this surrendering into, this water. So it was interesting, the parallels that I learned, because there was times where the water started doing something to the image. I was like, no. And I had to accept it. There was a time where I think like I put an image that I was really excited about into the water, and it ended up just like ripping all up. And I was like, oh my God, like experiences like that.
Yeah.
And the impermanence of them too, even in that stage, directly related to the subject matter of thinking about people whose lives were lost, in the same way that like the story of that image didn't continue, the story of that person didn't, that spirit. So then after developing the images that went into the next process, I printed them with the cyanotype process, which is including UV light and water. I chose to rinse them. The final rinse, which is like what reveals the blue tones, I did it with salt water, which is atypical, but I wanted to symbolically connect it to the ocean.
Yep.
And they were hung to dry and they were stretched. What I did find interesting, which is more spiritual than material, is how I do feel like the energy of them has shifted depending on the space that they're in, which I guess a lot of artists can say that. But there's something about kind of seeing in the studio versus the gallery, right, and the relationships that they have with the other pieces or the works that are in there, that I feel like they're shifting. And there's a sense of fluidity that other people have commented on to me, that I feel lucky that in some ways they do feel like they're charged.
Yeah. Yeah. And they are, by the intention that you had through the collection in general, and like the thought process of connecting it to like real experiences. And so in like a very real way, they are charged even just by like your hands and like the thought process that went into it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot of synchronicities that occurred in the works and the titles and the people that have been able to see it. I've had people from vastly different experiences in life, in terms of like they're not walking in a Black person's body, but they've walked into the show and drawn like deep connections to it and written to me. And I had this one woman write to me telling me that she had the worst like 24 hours of her life and walked into the show and felt like healed and grateful.
Wow.
So in that sense too, I think it's part of where I've like found value in like a gallery space. Because yes, like having a place for people to like be able to process and consume the work that's outside of the studio. There is an energy there that's appreciated.
Right. And I'm curious to know too, like what, just like technically speaking, I would like to hear more about that initial, I think we already talked about this, but that initial experience of like opening up the film ? And submerging it in fluid, because there's like a 2-step to it, right? Like there's one fluid, you take it out and then you put it in another one. Like what's that first fluid that it goes into?
It goes into,
at this point we're doing like chemistry.
You're
like,
fine, yeah.
Like at this point we're doing science experiments, and this is beyond my scope of knowledge.
It's not like it's something that anybody could do. It just like directly like worked with what I was speaking about in the works, but taking the Polaroid, cutting it open, peeling it away from the plastic of the film. So now the film, which is actually very thin, it's like gel-like, I've said like skin-like, it's a very like thin film material. But to detach it, to move it, it has to sit in boiling water. So it sits in boiling water for the glue to detach, for it to become a more flexible material. And then from there, it has to move into like different temperatures. I've done like room temperature, cold water. But I was less precious with the process. So it, like there's a suggested amount of time to retain the image exactly as it is, but I would let it sit for longer sometimes.
Yeah.
Or I would move it to the next tray. Again, non-preciously, like I would just let it like flow in there, and kind of like allow it to kind of be in flow with the water, and like lean into the ways that the water was pushing and pulling it.
Right.
So in that, like I said, there was times where I faced gates of frustration.
Yeah, things completely destroying.
It's just like, this isn't, or the introduction of frustration, which that happened with the first piece, where I was like, this is not what I imagined at all. And then still carrying forward with it and being like, but there's something here, and realizing that, also seeing it in the medium that it was supposed to live, the cyanotype, that there were certain details or textures that the cyanotype was able to show that like taught me to have more trust in the process.
Yeah, this is beautiful. I think like when you were explaining it to me, I was mostly in awe by the like chemistry of it all, because I feel like prior to our conversation, my extent of knowledge of photography was like obviously like digital. You snap a picture and it's just there, like, and then I kind of knew a little bit about like film in the sense that there's like a roll, and you kind of see in like the movies or TV shows sometimes when they're in that like UV room, developing the film. Room. Yeah, the dark room. But
I didn't have a dark room for these when in Silver Arts. I was at Silver Art Projects last year. Cyanotypes, they're light sensitive. So I would go in there with my studio manager at like, you know, sometimes the working hours shifted to like 8 p.m. to midnight or later to like make one print, and needing multiple people because we're doing it at that size. Cyanotypes are also affected by how you rinse them. So it all has to be rinsed at once, which takes multiple people, which takes a kiddie pool. Now we're not working with the sink anymore. We're literally building like a mini pool in the studio late at night in the hallway because I was at a residency.
Okay, so there's like multiple people in the space.
To carry it, to move the materials, because it's creating like a print of that size, like not like one piece but like all at once. So there was a lot about that process that no one could teach me. I had to teach myself, which again was like, there was multiple times, which it's a good lesson to learn in life, where you'll figure something out and then there's the next thing, and then you have to have patience with that process. And you're like, oh, I got that now.
Continuously learning.
Always.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to turn our attention to some of the actual pieces. Because it's interesting, you were talking about somebody reached out to you and mentioned like just feeling healed after being in the space. I feel like when I experienced the pieces for the first time, it was like, it put me in like a state of like reflection. Like even before I knew, like before we spoke and you kind of told me the like context of it all and like its relation to like Black bodies, I feel like the pieces themselves like just mirrored reflection, or like screamed like reflection and like turning inwards. And you spoke earlier about like meditation, and I feel like in my life I've had periods of times where I've been like incredibly like internal and reflective, and like meditation was part of like my practice of like existing on the earth. And I feel like over the last couple of months I've fallen out of that, where I've been just like more distracted, more like all over the place, not really meditating, not really journaling. And so when I entered the space, it was kind of like a reminder of like, or like a call to action to like turn inwards. And because it's like, I feel like I was looking at examples of like folks who were just like incredibly like present. So yeah, I would love to hear more just about how you like position the models, like who they were and stuff. I think, so for context, this is my favorite piece from the entire show. And I'm curious to know like, yeah, just like the process about like how it came to be, who you chose to be the subject, like how you position them.
So the models are mostly, like I said earlier, friends or friends of friends. Most people, that was their first time being photographed nude, which I think really translated in the works in terms of the intimacy of it and the time that it took to shoot, because these shoots weren't like come in the studio, get naked, and like let's photograph. I had like the privilege of having my own studio and being able to like take time with people. And there was people who were extremely like nervous about it, and like conscious of their bodies. But I told everybody, I was like, you can revoke consent at any point. If you want to leave right now, like we'll take everything down and you're fine. But what that did open the opportunity for was really deep reflective conversations with people about their bodies, about the work, about like just where we're at life, like catching up with people that I haven't seen in some time as well. And that would sometimes be like 1 or 2 hours before the shoot. And then after like building, I think, that intimacy in the space as it was.
Vulnerability.
Yeah. Allowing people to be vulnerable. Because like we'd be having vulnerable conversations. So I think when you introduce the body into that, that's not too far of a step. So that then, transitioned into like shooting. And it was a learning curve for me initially to like learn about like what the cyanotypes needed, because each body of work or each like project demands different things. And for this one, it was like you said, like that quiet meditation energy, but also looking at people's like bodies as material, thinking about like the flesh and the folds and how the negative space as well like will affect the final piece. So there was that learning curve, but I shot a lot, and I think that what that allowed for, I mean, I have books, like archival books of the ones that didn't make it into.
We might need to see those at some point.
Absolutely. I had them at Silver Arts where people could flip through and kind of like see which ones like I had chosen or put aside or whatever. But that allowed me the luxury of being able to curate down, of being like, okay, like I shot a lot from this angle, but like this one that's like close in like that, like really like sticks out. But of course, like I said, carrying it to the next stage was a whole other thing. But I think that that's part of why there was an intimacy with the images, because there's an intimacy with the people.
I can tell it definitely like came through the shots. How did you actually like position people? Because like, for example,
I don't position people.
Just like,
no, I don't. I asked people like what music would make them feel most comfortable and sensual. We put that on, and I feel more comfortable taking more time. Like I'd rather like spend the whole day there and like I'll like watch somebody get into their body than tell people how to pose. So that's why I said like I shoot a lot. I take a lot of time with it because I'd rather sit down and like go through stuff afterwards and be like, this was it, this wasn't it. Because I like, when, at least for this project, I feel like telling people what to do creates a power dynamic as well.
Okay, fair, yeah.
You know?
And then you lose some of that like individuality and just like the vulnerability that was already created in that space.
No, I'd encourage them. I'd be like, with the piece that you just pulled up, that's a friend of mine, and I told her, I was like, you look like a nymph, like a nymph in the ocean. And we would joke around and like talk about like, this is the energy that you're giving, and that encouragement would kind of like maybe be the encouragement to have them lean into that vibe a little bit. If I was liking, like, I'm like, okay, like I could see how this could translate. But it felt more collaborative in that space to not tell people what to do.
That makes sense. And
I don't like being told what to do.
Of course. And I'm honestly, that makes the feeling that I got from it make a lot of sense too.
Thanks for asking that.
Of course.
I'm interested because I bet like a lot of people probably do think that I was like, can you do this? Or and there's like maybe little comments like that, but not like, okay, so now lean your head. No, not at all.
And it just makes the whole collection feel like more natural too, because it's not forced. I did want to ask too, who are these people? Like, not who they are like exactly, but like, how did this shot come together? Is this like a couple that you know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Can you
artists.
tell me more about
Artists
that?
as well.
Okay.
Um,
Because this was also one of my favorite shots. Like
really?
it
Yeah.
felt very. I almost felt like I was watching like a couple, like not in a weird way,
Yeah, no.
but just in like
I felt that way.
in a loving setting. Yeah.
No, I felt that way. Like that
Yeah.
shoot got me really emotional, honestly,
Yeah.
because they're artists. They are yoga instructors, dancers.
Yeah.
So they have and meditators.
Mm.
They were so present in their bodies and in their love and talking
Mm.
about their relationship. So in that sense, actually, it's interesting that you say that. I almost felt like an observer. Like
Yeah.
I was like, what y'all? Like,
Yeah.
and I loved it. Like I did get really emotional. It made me start thinking about the relationships in my life.
Mm.
So it's interesting to think that really did carry into the piece. But it was that, and they also played this like some like music that was like I saved the song afterwards that we were playing during that shoot.
Mm.
I don't know if I would call it like electronic, but it had like this deep pulse to it.
Mm.
Yeah, everything about that shoot, and I think it was closer towards the end of them, had this depth to it that really was necessary, I think, for that body of work. Because when people ask about it, I just generally say it's about relationships, familial, romantic, etc. Thinking about like the relationships that were severed, but still always connected after that and during that event. And although the rest of the pieces are individual portraits, everybody's connected to somebody.
Yeah.
Everybody has a mother. Everybody has a father.
Yep.
And ultimately, like, there's also like ancestral connections as well that like were either carried forward or ended during that period. So like it was nice to have a direct representation of that.
Right.
Yeah, I feel really grateful that they were a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I think, I don't know, I think after hearing kind of the ethos or like the thesis behind the collection, like it was very special to kind of like see folks positioned in different ways, because it kind of like it kind of presented this visual of like, okay, what if these bodies were actually at the bottom of the ocean, like in these positions, like almost like a fossil. Like, not to be like grim, but
no,
like,
it's not grim. I had the same thought.
Like frozen in time, like this couple like holding each other in their final moments, or like your friend who's kind of in that like nymph position, kind of like what if that there's like a statue essentially of like a person in that position, like in their final moments, like at the bottom of the ocean. I don't know, something about that was.
I'm glad you identified that, because I thought about it in that way too. Yeah. You know, I don't know how to say this because it like transcends maybe some of the language that I can use, but like I had the same thought of like that fossil moment, but thinking then about like the fluidity of the ocean. It's like, how can something become frozen down there, not physically?
Right.
I don't have the language exactly for what I'm trying to say, but I'm like, I try to think about like the multiple planes of reality.
Yeah.
I think about like post-COVID, all the spirits that didn't have their proper resting place and how they're walking around now still. So in a similar sense, it's like I think about that similarly. Maybe like COVID is actually a good example of like how much death there was without burial. Here too, so much death, no burial. But I think the element of water, there's something about it. I've talked a lot about the womb space. That I think that's why a lot of the pieces like have this sort of like release energy of like, you know, this kind of going into the light, but thinking about like that organic matter maybe being able to absorb and heal that energy. Yeah.
And I think, I appreciate you for bringing up the healing aspect of it too, because I feel like a lot of times, I don't know, so for context, I'm Haitian, and there's been a lot of like natural disasters in Haiti, And I feel like oftentimes people attribute natural disasters to like evil or like wrongdoings of the people in that space. Like even if you think about like Hurricane Katrina, like there was a lot of just inappropriate comments about like,
of course,
I don't know, that area like deserving something like this because of XYZ. And so I think a lot of the time when we think about like Black people and Black spaces, whether that's like cities or countries, and we think about the relation to water and we think about the relation to natural disasters, it almost oftentimes comes back to like spirituality, but in a negative way. Like people are like conjuring up bad spirits in these places. But on the other side, we don't often have conversations about like the healing powers like of water and like being in communities near water and like fishing communities. Like the first time I was in Haiti as an adult, and I remember like going to the ocean and like folks like cooking like in the ocean together, like catching conches and catching fish and like cooking on the ocean. And it's like, oh, like, you know, we even mentioned that just all the stereotypes about Black people not being able to swim, being like somebody from New York and then going into the Caribbean, going to Haiti and seeing just like entire communities of people like existing in the water like on a daily basis. And
but
how
that itself was demonized.
Exactly.
That very comfort originally was demonized. And one of the books that was a big part of the research, like one of like I have my Bibles. Was written by Kevin Dawson, who has like since like been an advisor like to me. We've had beautiful conversations about this work. He wrote Undercurrents of Power, and it talks about the history like pre-colonial on of Black people in aquatic spaces. And he talks about how there again, like that's where he pulled that surfing was first recorded in Ghana. But there was this tone of condescension, and of course condescension, but just like exoticizing African people who had that comfort with water because it was not innate to the culture that they were bringing over. So they would be like, what are these savages doing, like fully submerged in water and swimming, and they're on wooden boards? And there was like this curiosity, but also this negativity. And I actually found it really fascinating that originally Black people, throughout that experience, often found comfort, safety, and escape in water. So they were swimming to safety.
Right.
They, at times were even rescuing their captors from drowning because they were on ships but didn't know how to swim themselves. They were bathing and keeping themselves clean and free of disease, yet still being seen as disease. Through water.
While interacting with people who are bringing disease.
With people who are bringing diseases. There was accounts of young Black women being able to gain autonomy and escape sexual assault through water. Because like these men would just get like it makes me think of literally like nymphs or sirens, where it's like they would go into the water and be like, now I'm in a space where you can't touch me.
Right.
And they would be able to tease and kind of like gain some sort of like self-security again, because they're now in a space that they can't be accessed, but still perceived, still objectified. And it was really like insane to me to sit with that and be like, wow, like this was like in many ways we were saved by water and different individual experiences. Yet over time, like of course, because that was negating our value, because when you lose a person, like you lose whatever price tag comes with them. There was psychological torture, like specifically with water, to make people afraid of it so that they wouldn't use their skills to protect themselves. And then that carried over into, of course, putting people in urban communities and denying them access to pools, and that happened over time. And I think it was kind of like the last, stamp on us, like many communities losing that innate ability. But like to think that, and there still is, but to think that like our ancestors, many of them had such a like deep and like just comfortable relationship with water, and then you kind of like hear some of the stories of mainly people here. It is really sad, and it's something that's worth reclaiming.
Yeah, and I think it kind of ties into a lot of conversations that I've had with friends of mine who are like Black American, like they're the I guess ancestry that they trace themselves to, the farthest back they can go is like slavery, like slaves, enslaved individuals who like were here.
Yeah.
And many of them, like their families grew up in landlocked like places, and so I think part of that like reconnection with the diaspora for like Black Americans also does kind of include oftentimes like that exploration of like the water and communities that live on the water. And like I think that's just one example of many things that we've been cut off from, including like our own spiritualities, including like
talk about it,
different forms of wellness, the same way like yoga and meditation and journaling, like these are not really seen as like Black things, but they're things that we've done, like our people have done for forever.
Yeah, community healing spaces being accessible to, like, I've been reflecting on that a lot with like being able to like go deeper into some of my friendships recently, like how this is how like our bodies, our spirits are wired for this community feeling, sitting around eating together, walking together, like having just access to each other in like good and bad times, which I like, and doing so in a, like, I guess the way that we've kind of been talking about, which is sad that we have to define this, but like in a non-capitalistic, like we're not going out to dinner, like we're just here together,
just existing,
we're just existing together.
Yeah.
Like you're involved with my family's involved with you, like the levels of our relationship go beyond just like you and me hanging out, but my mom's helping you with this, you and my dad are doing this, like you and my brother are like gonna go do that, me and your sister, your whatever, your family. And it's something that I feel like, at least with people that, like friends that I've had that are, you know, maybe in this generation, that we feel like we have to more consciously, again, kind of like curate in our lives and set aside time for it, because we're living now in a society, in a space where being isolated and lacking in resources and being focused on the individual, and focused on the individual and your blood.
Yep.
Is what you're being pushed to prioritize, which is only making us easier to control. And we could go into all of this, but no, I mean, there's so much about the beauty of what we have and what can still be passed down to us as we connect with our ancestors, because they're always accessible to us, whether they are here physically or not. That, you know, is worthwhile to sit with, to take the time for. And I'm glad that, you know, maybe in some ways that's been sparked through the art.
100% in many ways. And I think that's probably like a beautiful note to close on. I guess, do you have any like last words about like what you want people to derive from your work, or like anything that you have coming up that you want to share about? Any parting words?
I've learned so much from what people derive from the work, that I'm someone that tries to live what I preach, in terms of like, I was asked in an interview the other day, like, what do people need to know about you? I'm like, nothing. Nothing at all. Whatever they want to know, they can ask me or find out or whatever, but we live in this space of like fluidity and impermanence. I'm working on now, I'm transitioning into a new studio space.
Amazing.
Starting to incorporate more mediums into my work. I'm of course like deepening, expanding the research always. What's cool about art, I guess, as with many things, but maybe like specifically I've found this connection, like art and sports, is the cycles of being on and off, and like the different things expected of you in your career. So in the last, like, while the show's been open, I've been on in a different way, more social, speaking about it, having to like translate my words. So what I'm really looking forward to is kind of like, now we're hitting the tail end of it. The show's going to close in a few days. And like I get to shift into the next space, which is kind of like full circle back to where I was before
Yep.
with like getting to digest again and like translate that into new works. So hopefully in that research there will also be travel.
Yep.
Because I've found a lot of healing in that for myself, being in the ocean, being around Black communities and water. That's not something that I had. So being able to find that through my art has been very inspiring.
Yeah.
And something that I want to translate into future works.
Beautiful. Well, I'm very excited to see whatever comes next from you. Whenever it comes, we'll be very patient for it. Congratulations again on the show. It was amazing. Shout out to you. Shout out to Plato Gallery. And yeah, thank you for your time, your energy. And yeah, we can close there. Appreciate you.